I don't think anyone ever really plans to grow up hating their own family. Most of us as kids are just grateful for the people who put a roof over our heads, who feed us, who make sure we're alive and, at least in theory, loved. For the longest time, I wanted so badly to believe that's what my family was. I clung to that belief, even when every single sign told me otherwise. But looking back now with years of distance and perspective, I can say with absolute certainty, I wasn't really my parents' child. Not in the way my brother was. His name is Jake. Mine's not important right now. What matters is that from the day I was old enough to form memories, Jake was the center of the universe in our household. He was the son, the golden boy, the chosen one. And me? I was just there. Orbiting around him like some meaningless planet, useful only to reflect light back onto him. I was 5 the first time I realized Jake's mistakes didn't count. He was 7 then, already showing signs of the boy he would become. We had this glass lamp in the living room, ugly thing, a hand-me-down from my grandma. One afternoon Jake and I were playing tag in the house, something we weren't supposed to do. He knocked the lamp off the table. It shattered. My mom stormed into the room, face twisted with rage. I was frozen in place, terrified. She didn't even ask who had done it. She just looked at me standing there closer to the mess and said, "Why can't you ever be careful? Do you know how much this cost?" I tried to explain, my little voice shaking, that it was Jake. But she wouldn't hear it. Jake just stood behind her, silent, wide-eyed, almost smug. That was the pattern. Again and again. Jake scribbled on the walls with crayons? My fault. Jake poured juice on the carpet? My fault. Jake hit me with a toy truck until I cried? Somehow still my fault, because I must have provoked him. I learned early that truth didn't matter in my house. What mattered was keeping Jake comfortable. Jake grew up spoiled in ways I didn't even have words for at the time. He didn't do chores. He didn't clean his room. He didn't say thank you or please. He didn't have to. When he wanted something, he got it. Video games, new clothes, expensive sneakers that he'd scuff up within weeks. My parents, who constantly told me we didn't have much money, would somehow find the cash when it was for him. Me. I wore hand-me-downs. My backpack for school was a ripped one from the thrift store. If I asked for something, I was selfish or ungrateful. I'll never forget one Christmas when I was 10. I'd been begging for a sketchbook and a decent set of pencils. Art was my escape back then. I'd draw in the margins of my notebooks at school, on scraps of paper at home, anything I could find. That Christmas morning, I opened my one present. It was socks. Meanwhile, Jake unwrapped a brand new PlayStation 2. My parents beamed as he squealed with joy. I remember sitting there, clutching those socks, trying so hard not to cry. My mom noticed my expression and snapped, "Don't you dare ruin this for him. Be grateful you got something at all." I was always grateful. But it was never enough. In school, the differences between us became even sharper. I loved learning. I wasn't a genius, but I worked hard. I got good grades. I wanted to make my teachers proud. Jake. He didn't care. He barely passed most of his classes. He cheated on tests, skipped homework, and mouthed off to teachers. But at home, the narrative was always the same. Jake is just misunderstood. Jake has a lot on his mind. Boys will be boys. Meanwhile, if I got a B instead of an A, my dad would lecture me for an hour about wasted potential. When I made the honor roll in 7th grade, my parents barely acknowledged it. "That's what you're supposed to do," my dad said flatly. But when Jake hit one home run at his little league game, after skipping practice for weeks, my parents threw a cookout to celebrate. They invited the whole neighborhood. At home, I became the de facto third parent. By 12, I was doing laundry for the whole family, cooking simple meals, vacuuming, cleaning the bathroom. If something needed doing, it was me who did it. Jake. He sat on the couch playing video games. Sometimes my mom would gently say, "Jake, can you help your sister?" He'd grunt, maybe throw a dish in the sink, and that was enough. But if I ever complained, if I ever said it was unfair, my parents would scold me. "Life isn't fair. Stop being dramatic. Your brother has a lot going on. You're stronger. You can handle it." I didn't feel strong. I felt invisible. The summer before high school, I got my first real chance at something just for me. My art teacher nominated me for a special program, a summer workshop at the local community college for young artists. It wasn't free, but there was a scholarship that covered most of it. All I needed was for my parents to pay the $200 supply fee. I was ecstatic. This was my dream. When I showed my parents the letter, my mom frowned. "That's a lot of money." "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," I pleaded. My dad shook his head. "We can't afford that right now." I was crushed. But a week later Jake came home with a brand new dirt bike. It must have cost at least $500. When I pointed it out, my dad glared at me. "Don't compare yourself to your brother. He needs encouragement. You'll be fine." I wasn't fine. That was the first time I realized my dreams would never matter in that house. Jake got in trouble a lot, shoplifting from a gas station, sneaking out at night, failing classes. Every time my parents defended him. "He just needs guidance. He's hanging out with the wrong crowd. He's under a lot of pressure." If I so much as raised my voice, I was disrespectful and ungrateful. By the time I was 15, I'd stopped trying to earn their approval. I buried myself in schoolwork, in art, in part-time jobs, babysitting and mowing lawns. I saved every dollar I could because deep down I knew, if I wanted a future I'd have to build it myself. There were rare moments when I thought maybe things would change. Once, in 10th grade, I won a regional art competition. My piece got displayed in a local gallery. My teacher even called my parents, urging them to come see it. They didn't. "We're busy," my mom said flatly when I asked. But that same week, they drove 3 hours to watch Jake's football game, where he didn't even play because he'd been benched for skipping practice. I remember standing in that gallery, surrounded by strangers admiring my work, and feeling both proud and utterly abandoned. That's when the bitterness started to set in. By the time I was nearing adulthood, I didn't just feel neglected, I felt betrayed. It wasn't just that they loved Jake more. It was that they enabled him over and over at my expense. Every sacrifice I made, every chore I did, every achievement I earned, it all fed into supporting him. Jake didn't respect them. He mocked them behind their backs. He bragged about getting away with things. Sometimes he'd even look at me and smirk, like he knew the whole game was rigged in his favor. And he was right. The older I got, the clearer it became. In my parents' eyes, Jake could do no wrong and I could do no right. That realization was the beginning of the end. It was like living in a parallel universe. When I turned 19, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. Most of my classmates were preparing for college, moving into dorms, or renting their first apartments. Some were already working full-time jobs, exploring freedom for the first time. Me. I was still stuck in that suffocating house, carrying the invisible weight of being the unwanted child. I had been saving money from part-time jobs, late-night cashier shifts, tutoring younger kids, and working weekends at a coffee shop. My dream was simple: get out, finally have a space that was mine, no more walking on eggshells, no more listening to my parents sing hymns of praise about my brother. But every time I brought up the idea of moving out, my parents would shoot me down with rehearsed lines. "You don't need an apartment. We already provide for you. Why waste money on rent when you can stay here?" Or worse, "If anyone needs help moving out, it's your brother. He just needs the right environment to succeed." That last one always cut deep. My brother, let's call him Eric, was 2 years older than me. At 21 he had no job, no diploma, no sense of responsibility. He bounced between failed community college classes, big ideas that never materialized, and nights spent drinking with friends. And yet, to my parents, he was the golden child who just needed understanding. Meanwhile, I had been accepted into a decent college nearby. I was proud, until I realized my parents had no intention of helping me financially. When I asked about tuition, my mom sighed as though I was being unreasonable. "College isn't cheap. And you know your brother still hasn't figured out his path. We can't abandon him when he needs us most." I wanted to scream, "What about me? Don't I need support too?" But I bit my tongue. So I took out loans, kept my jobs, and juggled everything on my own. Some nights, I'd come home from closing the coffee shop at midnight, exhausted, and find Eric sprawled on the couch playing video games, using the brand new console my parents had surprised him with. "You work too much," he'd say with a smirk, not looking up from the screen. "Relax. Life's not that serious." Easy for him to say when he had a free roof over his head, free meals, and parents who defended him like he was a saint. The real breaking point started with a fight. It was one of those summer nights when the air felt heavy, the house was sticky, and everyone was already irritable. I had just come home from work, still in my uniform, drenched in sweat, carrying my tips in my pocket. As I walked into the kitchen to grab some food, I noticed the fridge looked emptier than usual. No milk, no eggs, barely any leftovers. "Mom, did we run out of groceries already?" I asked, opening and closing the fridge like the missing food would magically appear. My mom was at the table, sipping tea, flipping through a magazine. She didn't look up. "We had to cut back a little this week. Your father's paycheck went toward helping your brother with something important." I froze. Helping him with what? She sighed dramatically as though I was bothering her with unnecessary questions. Eric needed money for his new business idea. He's thinking of starting an online store. We believe in him, so we wanted to give him a chance. I laughed bitterly. An online store? He can't even hold a job for more than 2 weeks. And now we don't have groceries because of his business idea? That got her attention. She slammed the magazine shut and glared at me. Don't talk about your brother like that. At least he's trying to find his place. Not everyone is as cold and calculating as you. Cold and calculating? I repeated, stunned. I'm literally paying for my own education, my own clothes, everything. And I'm the bad guy for pointing out we don't have food because you gave my lazy brother more money? Her voice rose. You don't understand. Family supports each other no matter what. Funny, I snapped, because this family hasn't supported me once. The silence that followed was deafening. The real explosion came a few weeks later. I was getting ready to leave for work when Eric barged into my room without knocking. Hey, he said casually, Mom and Dad said you've been saving money, right? I frowned. Yeah, why? He leaned against my dresser like he owned the place. I need to borrow some. Just a few hundred. I'll pay you back when my business takes off. I stared at him, stunned. Are you serious? I'm working 3 jobs to survive. Why would I give you my savings? His face darkened. Because I'm your brother. And that's what family does. Mom said you'd help me if I asked. I couldn't help it, I laughed in disbelief. No, absolutely not. If Mom wants to keep funding your nonsense, fine. But I'm not giving you a dime. Eric's expression twisted with anger. You think you're better than me, don't you? Just because you go to college and slave away at crappy jobs. Guess what? When my business takes off, I'll be the one supporting Mom and Dad, not you. I shook my head. Good luck with that. Later that evening when I came home from work, I walked into the middle of a screaming match. Eric had clearly told my parents about our conversation and they were furious with me. My dad's voice boomed across the living room. How dare you speak to your brother that way? He came to you for help and you mocked him. Mocked him? I said, my voice trembling with rage. He asked me for money that I need to survive. I didn't mock him, I said no. You're selfish, my mom hissed. You've always been selfish. We raised you to care about family, but all you care about is yourself. That was it. The dam broke. Years of being ignored, years of favoritism, years of watching them coddle Eric while I worked myself to the bone, it all came pouring out. You think I'm selfish? I shouted. I've been paying for my own education while you hand him money for video games and fake businesses. I've been working nonstop while he sits on his ass. I've been surviving on my own since I was 15, and you still call me selfish? My dad's face turned red. If you don't like how we run this house, then maybe you shouldn't live here anymore. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment I thought he didn't mean it. But then he added, cold and final. Pack your things. If you can't respect this family, you don't belong in it. My mom didn't protest. She didn't even look at me. Eric smirked from the couch, victorious. And just like that, at 19 years old, I was kicked out of my home. I didn't have a plan. I stuffed clothes into garbage bags, grabbed my school backpack, and left. No hugs, no apologies, no goodbyes. I remember sitting in my old beat-up car, parked a few blocks away, shaking with anger and fear. I had maybe $200 in my account. Rent was out of the question. I had no relatives nearby. No close friends who could take me in permanently. For the first time, I was truly homeless. That night, I slept in the backseat of my car, using my jacket as a pillow, trying not to cry. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the nights I had worked while Eric wasted his life, and now I was the one thrown away. The irony burned in my chest. When I stepped out of that house for the last time, the air felt colder than it should have. It wasn't just the night breeze, it was the weight of finality. My parents had closed the door on me, literally and figuratively, and the sound of that latch clicking behind me echoed louder than anything I had ever heard before. I stood there on the porch for a moment, gripping the straps of my worn backpack, realizing that I didn't just leave home. I had been erased from it. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have savings big enough to support me. I didn't even have the emotional clarity to understand what had just happened. I only knew one thing, I couldn't go back. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. At first, I leaned on the only person I thought I could, my friend Daniel. His family let me crash on their couch. They were kind, but their house was already cramped and they had their own problems. I would lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of their old refrigerator, trying to stay quiet so no one would hear me crying into the pillow. Every morning I tried to act grateful and upbeat, but deep inside, guilt gnawed at me. I was a guest, an intruder in someone else's family life. When I overheard his mom whisper to his dad about how, "This can't go on forever," my chest tightened so hard it was painful. So, I left before they had to ask. My car became my bedroom. The passenger seat turned into my bed, the dashboard my nightstand. I parked in quiet corners of grocery store lots, always moving before dawn to avoid suspicion. I brushed my teeth in gas station bathrooms and washed my face with cold water that stung against my skin. I'll never forget one night in particular. It was raining hard and the roof of my car leaked just enough for water to drip onto my blanket. I curled up tighter, shivering, hugging myself for warmth. I stared through the foggy window at the world outside, other people going home to warmth, to light, to families who welcomed them back. And I asked myself the same questions over and over. Why me? Why am I out here, abandoned, while my brother is tucked in under a roof I helped pay for? Why am I being punished for being the responsible one? The answers never came. Weeks turned into months. My parents never called. Not even once. No, are you safe? No, do you have food? Nothing. Their silence cut deeper than any words ever could. It was confirmation. I wasn't their child anymore. The pain was unbearable at times. I saw families walking together in the park, fathers laughing with their daughters, mothers fixing their sons' jackets against the wind. And every time, it felt like a knife twisting in me. That should have been mine too. That kind of love, that kind of safety, things I never realized were privileges until I lost them. Eventually, through sheer exhaustion and grinding hours at the diner where I worked, I scraped together enough for a tiny rented room. The walls were thin, the ceiling stained with water damage, and the lock on the door barely worked. But it was mine. I'll never forget the first night I slept there. I spread my blanket on the squeaky mattress, lay down, and stared at the cracked ceiling. It wasn't warm, it wasn't comfortable, but I could finally breathe. Nobody could come into this room and tell me to leave. Nobody could throw me out in the middle of the night. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. I pushed myself harder than ever before. I worked double shifts, sometimes standing on my feet for 14 hours straight until my legs ached and my hands smelled permanently of grease and dish soap. But every paycheck meant progress. I bought a second-hand laptop. I signed up for community college, paying one class at a time. Balancing work and study was brutal, but every A I earned felt like proof that I wasn't the failure they had painted me to be. That I was more than the discarded child they had abandoned. When my professor told me, "You write like someone who's been through a lot, but that makes your work powerful," I nearly cried right there. Someone finally saw me, not as a burden, not as a failure, but as someone capable. But even as I crawled upward, the pain never fully left. Holidays were the hardest. Christmas came, and while the streets glowed with lights and music filled the stores, I sat alone in my room with instant noodles. I scrolled through social media, seeing photos of my peers at dinner tables surrounded by family. Their parents smiling, siblings laughing, food covering every inch of the table. I imagined what was happening in my old house. My brother, sitting at the head of the table eating the meal my mother cooked, unwrapping gifts, maybe even bragging about how great his life was. And my parents smiling, pretending everything was fine. Pretending their family was whole while I was erased from the picture. That night, I cried harder than I had in months. Not because I wanted presents or food, but because all I wanted was to belong somewhere. Time, though, has a strange way of hardening scars into armor. With every year that passed, I grew stronger. My body toughened from the long shifts. My mind sharpened from balancing studies and survival. My heart, though still bruised, learned to keep beating even without their love. And slowly, I began to realize something. I wasn't weak for being abandoned. I was strong for surviving it. Every dollar I earned was mine. Every grade I achieved was proof of my resilience. Every step forward was a victory I owed only to myself. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I was building my own life. And that thought, more than anything, gave me freedom. Years passed this way. I worked. I studied. I moved into a better apartment. I surrounded myself with people who cared, people who saw value in me where my parents hadn't. And then, just when I started to believe the past couldn't reach me anymore, I got a phone call. The name flashing on my screen froze me in place. Mom? I hadn't seen that name in years. My first instinct was to let it ring out. To ignore it. To bury the past where it belonged. But my hands trembled as I pressed accept. Hello? My voice cracked. There was a long pause and then her voice, fragile, uncertain. Honey, we need to talk. That sentence alone shattered the fragile peace I had built. Because suddenly, after years of silence, they wanted me back in their lives. And I had no idea why. When my mother's voice echoed through the phone, fragile and uncertain, I felt 1,000 emotions collide all at once. Rage, sadness, longing, a strange, dangerous hope. For years, I had craved to hear her call me honey again, yet now, after all the silence, the word felt poisonous. My fingers clenched so hard around the phone that my knuckles turned white. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. There was a pause, filled with static and shallow breathing. Then she whispered, We made mistakes. Your father and I, we want to see you. Please, come home for dinner. Just once. We need to talk." After hanging up, I sat in the corner of my small but clean apartment, staring at the wall for hours. My chest felt like it was being torn apart. Part of me wanted to slam the door on them forever, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But another part, the wounded child still hiding inside me, ached for answers. Why now? Why after years of silence? Did they finally regret what they did? Or was this just another trick to use me? I couldn't sleep that night. My mind replayed every moment of abandonment, every night in my car, every bowl of instant noodles eaten alone. I reminded myself of the scars they left behind, and yet my heart whispered, what if they've changed? A week later, I stood in front of the house I once called home. The paint had faded, the garden was overgrown, but to me it still looked exactly the same. The same porch where I had stood, abandoned with my backpack. The same door that had closed on me when I was no longer wanted. My throat tightened just looking at it. I knocked. My hand trembled so much I almost missed the wood. When the door opened, my mother stood there. She looked older, gray streaks in her hair, lines carved deep into her face, but her eyes were the same. The same eyes that once turned cold when they chose my brother over me. "Honey," she whispered again, as if that word could erase the years. I stepped inside cautiously. The air smelled like the same old furniture polish, the same faint scent of my father's cigarettes. Every corner of the house screamed with memories, me doing homework on the dining table, my father laughing in front of the TV, my mother cooking while humming softly. Except now those memories felt like ghosts haunting me. Then I saw him. My brother, slouched on the couch, a beer in one hand, his phone in the other. He looked worse than I remembered. His face bloated, his eyes tired, his body unkempt. He barely glanced at me before smirking. "Well, look who finally decided to crawl back," he said with a mocking tone. My blood boiled instantly. All those nights in the car, all those tears, and here he was, still being coddled, still rotting in the same seat while my parents bent their lives around him. But I didn't respond. Not yet. We sat at the dinner table. My mother had cooked my favorite dish, lasagna, the one I used to beg for on birthdays. But when she placed it in front of me, I couldn't eat. The smell reminded me of family dinners that should have been warm, yet were laced with favoritism. Silence stretched across the table until my father cleared his throat. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but still carried that sharp edge. "We want to apologize," he began. "Things got out of hand. We didn't handle things right with you. We made mistakes." I stared at him, waiting for the words I had longed to hear. "We're sorry for abandoning you. We're sorry for choosing him over you." But those words never came. Instead, he looked at me and said, "But you have to understand, your brother needed us more. He was struggling. He still is." That was it. The thin thread of patience inside me snapped. I slammed my fork onto the table, the sound sharp and final. "He needed you more?" My voice trembled, but it wasn't weakness, it was fury. "I was out there, homeless, sleeping in my car while you gave him everything. I begged you for help and you turned your backs on me. And now, years later, you're telling me it was all justified? Because he was struggling?" My mother's eyes welled up with tears. "We thought you were strong enough. Strong enough to be abandoned? Strong enough to survive alone while you fed his addictions?" My voice cracked louder now. "You didn't choose me because you thought I was strong. You chose him because he was easier to love. Because he was your favorite." The silence that followed was suffocating. My brother laughed bitterly, muttering, "You always were so dramatic." I turned to him, my eyes burning. "Dramatic? I worked myself half to death while you sat here, drinking and wasting their money. You got love for free. I had to bleed for every scrap of dignity I have now. And you call me dramatic?" I looked back at my parents. My voice was calmer now, but sharper than ever. "You abandoned me. You chose him over me, and I will never forget that. You can't just cook me dinner and expect it all to go away. You don't get to erase the years I spent suffering. You don't get to rewrite history just because you suddenly feel guilty." My father lowered his eyes. My mother sobbed quietly. My brother rolled his eyes and reached for another beer. And in that moment something inside me shifted. I realized I had come here looking for closure, maybe even reconciliation. But instead what I found was freedom. Because their apologies, or lack of them, no longer mattered. I stood up from the table. My chair scraped harshly against the floor, echoing through the room. My mother reached out, her hand trembling, but I stepped back. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to touch me now. You had your chance years ago. You made your choice. And now I've made mine." I turned to leave, but before I stepped through that door, I looked back one last time. I survived without you. I built a life without you. And I will keep living without you. You don't deserve a place in my story anymore. And with that I walked out, this time by my choice, not theirs. The air outside was cold again, but this time it didn't sting. This time it felt fresh. Liberating. For the first time in years I wasn't the abandoned child. I was the survivor. I was free. The night I walked out of my parents' house I didn't look back. My steps felt heavy at first, like each one carried years of grief and anger. But with every breath of cold air filling my lungs I felt lighter. The sky was dark, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel suffocating. I wasn't walking away as a rejected child anymore. I was leaving as someone who had survived abandonment, pain, and betrayal, and had come out stronger. In the following days I expected to feel broken. I thought the confrontation would leave me empty, lost, or aching. But strangely I didn't. Instead, I woke up each morning with a new clarity. My apartment, though small, felt warmer than that entire house filled with ghosts. My modest furniture, my secondhand bookshelf, even the scratches on my kitchen table, they all felt mine. Honest. I started going through my routine with a new sense of purpose. Work didn't feel like a punishment anymore, it felt like proof of my resilience. Every paycheck, every bill paid, every meal cooked in my little kitchen was a victory. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. Weeks passed and I never received another call from my parents. No letters. No messages. Not even a half-hearted apology text. At first that silence stung. A part of me still hoped that they'd fight for me, that they'd prove I was worth chasing. But as more time went on, I realized something profound. Their silence wasn't proof of my unworthiness. It was proof of theirs. They couldn't face the truth I had thrown at them. They couldn't look in the mirror and admit what they had done. And maybe they never would. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Healing didn't come overnight. There were still nights I lay awake, replaying my brother's mocking laugh, my father's half-apology, my mother's trembling hand reaching out too late. But instead of drowning in those memories, I started writing them down. Page after page, I spilled my story into journals. Sometimes I cried as I wrote. Sometimes I shook with anger. But every word I put on paper was like pulling a thorn from my chest. And slowly the wounds began to close. I also sought therapy, something I had been too afraid or too ashamed to do before. My therapist helped me untangle the guilt that wasn't mine to carry. She helped me see that their failures as parents weren't a reflection of my worth. For the first time, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see the abandoned child. I saw someone resilient, independent, whole. Blood may tie people together, but it doesn't guarantee love, respect, or loyalty. I learned that the hard way. But in the absence of my parents, I discovered something better. Chosen family. Friends who showed up when I was at my lowest. Colleagues who encouraged me when I doubted myself. Even strangers who became confidants. These were the people who celebrated my victories no matter how small. The people who reminded me that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands beside you when you fall. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing love from people incapable of giving it. I was surrounding myself with those who already gave it freely. Years later, I sometimes think about that night, the dinner table, the arguments, the tears. I wonder if my parents ever sit in that same house and feel the weight of my absence. I wonder if they ever regret it. But here's the truth I've come to accept. Whether they regret it or not doesn't matter anymore. I gave them the chance to face me, to own up to their choices. They didn't. And by walking away, I gave myself something far greater than their approval. I gave myself freedom. If there's one thing my story has taught me, it's this. You can't force people to love you the way you deserve. You can't beg for the kind of care that should come naturally. And sometimes, the hardest, but most powerful, thing you can do is walk away. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and presence. And if those things are missing, then it's okay. No, it's necessary to build a new family from the ground up. To anyone who has ever felt unwanted, unloved, or abandoned, you are not defined by the people who failed you. You are defined by the strength it took to survive without them. I was left homeless by the very people who should have protected me. But I turned that pain into power. And today I stand not as their forgotten child, but as my own person. I am free. I am whole. And I am more than enough. I may not have the parents I once needed, but I have myself. And that's enough.